Barbara, do you want to say anything at this time, or do you want me to just go ahead and get started? Okay, everybody. So welcome to this webinar, which is Native Plants for Every Landscape Situation, which is sponsored by the Native Plant Master Program. And today we're just going to be talking about ways to use native plants. So I think a lot of times, you know, they're not grouped in a way that that helps to make people, you know, just helps to make it useful. And so today we're going to be kind of grouping things in a way that should be helpful. So I think all of you should have gotten a link or an email with the a list of plants for the presentation today. And so that's going to be the handout for today. So I see some people are asking for PowerPoint slides. Probably we won't be having PowerPoint slides afterwards, but you do have the list. So that should have come to you in an email this morning. So, and before we fully get started, I would like to recommend some of the Native Plant Master programs that are in the Metro to Mountain area. So these are programs that are sponsored by the main office in Jefferson County. And I think most of the people are on, or many of the people on this are in this Jefferson County area. But if you're not, you can also go and look on the Native Plant Master website to see ones that might be in your area if you are outside of the greater Metro to Mountain area. So more of the classes, or you can see the classes at the NPM Eventbrite website, so nbm.eventbrite.com. You can see the full listing of classes. I thought it'd just be fun to highlight some of the newer classes that are happening this year, which include a keen practicum at Roxborough and painting the native landscape. But that's in addition to the traditional classes like the basic botany and then all the wonderful field classes and courses where you can go out in the field and really learn about native plants and see them in situ. And if you're interested in getting certified, you can learn more at the website at the bottom, www.m2mnativeplantmaster.org, or you can call the Jefferson County office at 303-271-6621. So that's just some upcoming fun events, this webinar being one of our spring ones. And so this is a different format than often the Native Plant Master programs are done. They're usually live and in the field, and so here's a way to get a lot of people and to also get out maybe a little bit earlier than the weather will otherwise allow. Okay, so just following what we're going to be doing today. So the plants that I'm going to be talking about today are all Colorado native plants, and some of them will be relatively easy to find, and so those ones are marked with an exclamation point. And some of them are harder to find. So I wanted to kind of give a wide variety of plants, so maybe not to go over all the same plants that you might have seen before. Also, I want to point out that on your list, some of them have a wide tolerance for what they can grow in. And so they'll grow in exposures or soils beyond the category I initially put them in. And those are marked with an asterisk. And so some of them fit in a bunch of different categories, but I put them in the category that I thought highlighted them the best. So the other thing I want to point out is that the list is not comprehensive. So this is not by any stretch all of the native plants that would fit into a different category, and that would take days to cover all of those. But at least this is a good start and a good overview for an hour lunchtime webinar. Okay, so let's start with probably a really common condition for Colorado, which is plants or a situation where you have well-drained soil and sun, and those, okay, I'm seeing somebody has a raised hand. I don't know if that means that you have a problem, Brenda, so I want to make sure that you're okay before we continue to go on. Okay, so Brenda can't hear the audio. Everyone else was saying that they were hearing okay. So, so I'm not quite sure, Brenda, what's going on. And I know you can't hear me, so here, I'm just going to type in Okay, I'm just typing in. And make sure your speakers are on. Okay, so that's about all I can do for Brenda right now. Maybe some of the rest of you, it seems like you're being very helpful, so thank you very much. Okay, so anyway, starting again with the plants that are in for a situation with well-drained soil and sun. Some of the plants include Indian rice grass. So this is what it looks like. Okay, our next plant is big blue stem. And this is one of the glories of the prairie. So this actually, big blue stem used to occur over much of the Great Plains, loves clay soils, and it has a nice upright presence in the garden. And then in the fall, it turns a wonderful sort of glowing reddish brown golden color. And then the seed heads catch the light. And so it's really reaches its very much its pinnacle in the fall. Our next plant is blue grama. So this is a plant that you could use. So some of you want to get rid of a lawn and you want to be growing something that still looks like grass. Well, blue grama, which happens to be, by the way, our state grass, is a wonderful choice for that. So you can actually use it as a lawn substitute. And if you leave it unmowed, it will develop little eyelash-like seed heads, and they look great in the sun. But you also can mow it if you want to. So you could also mix this grass in with other wildflowers in more of a sort of mixed prairie look. So it's a pretty forgiving grass. And so if you are looking, again, for a lawn substitute, give this one a try. All right, our next one is the narrow leaf coneflower, so Echinacea angustifolia. So this is one of our native echinaceas. Most echinaceas are either hybrids or are from further east than Colorado. But this one actually does make it into Colorado, although only on the very eastern plains. And it is a clay lover, and it has a pale pink flower. It attracts butterflies and bees, and it will self-seed, and it also has some medicinal purposes. So this is, again, if you want to be growing our native coneflower, this would be your choice. Maximilian sunflower is a great choice for the fall garden. So this blooms sometimes it doesn't even start blooming until September. This would not be a good choice for people in the mountains because it blooms too late in the season to be useful for the mountains. But for people at lower elevations that have a lot of heat, this is a wonderful plant. It has a lot of height to the garden, is very happy in clay soils, and it will attract both butterflies and bumblebees and honeybees. And again, it's one of those late summer, when everything else is looking ratty, this is going to come into its full glory just when everything else is going to sleep. And spotted gay feather is also in that late blooming category. So again, this is going to be better for people at lower elevations rather than in the mountains. But this is a fantastic color accent in the fall garden. So it would look good with all those plants like the rabbit brush or the Maximilian sunflower. It's a little bit shorter growing, but it is a butterfly magnet, and it is, and I think of it, even though it's actually not related to penstemons, I kind of think of it as a fall blooming penstemon just because it has that same upright, very colorful look to it. So it's actually in the sunflower family, but in the garden, it acts like a fall blooming penstemon. Desert or showy 4 o'clock is a wonderful drought-tolerant plant. It can actually take well-drained soils and very clay soils. It could be in your most unwatered part of your garden. It has these lovely rose pink flowers that attract bumblebees, but they also are very attractive to hawk moths, which are also called hummingbird moths, if you're familiar with that. And this can be a big sprawling plant, so it's not going to spread underground by rhizomes, but it will spread by, just a sprawling plant. So this will grow quickly, provide a long season of bloom, and be very drought tolerant. So kind of think of where would be a good situation for it in the garden, and plant it accordingly, and you'll be happy with it. If you try to stuff it into too small of a space, it will probably drive you crazy because it'll get a little bit too big. All right, Scarlet Globe Mallow. This is going to be a little harder to find, but it is a charming plant. It is a spring blooming plant, and it has just the best color of orange. So this is going to come to life pretty soon, probably in April, possibly early May. And it's very good for different pollinators, and it is just super drought tolerant, tough. It can really handle, like you can see on the right, it can handle full-on clay soils, and it will just bloom and be cheerful and look great in the garden. Okay, so now we are moving on. So some of you, so we've kind of talked about a couple of different situations that would be common in the Colorado, you know, you might say, well, okay, I have a garden that I've been, you know, it's been amended for a long time. I live in an urban area, and I've been, you know, attempting to make my soil better. And so what natives would work in that situation? So let's talk about some of those. So Pearly Everlasting is a great plant for that situation. It has a lovely sort of gray-green foliage, and it attracts butterflies, it attracts bees, and it also is a great cut flower. So if you see on the bottom right a little wreath made from Pearly Everlasting. People who craft with dried flowers know this plant well because it's one of the nicest, it will dry perfectly. So that upper right picture will be exactly how it dries. And so you can use it in all kinds of classes, in all kinds of crafts. Okay. Next one is swamp milkweed. So a lot of us want to be growing plants that will help the monarch butterflies, and any kind of milkweed will help the caterpillars and the monarch butterflies. So the milkweeds also, though, will help all kinds of other insects. So the bees, bumblebees love them. A lot of different butterflies will come and have the nectar. The swamp milkweed also happens to be a wonderfully fragrant plant. And so if you like for, you know, so I couldn't decide whether I'd put this one in the amended soils or the fragrance section, but it could go into either category just as well. And so, so this is, you know, a plant that's going to get pretty tall in the garden, but it really looks spectacular. It blooms in the later summer, so it's going to be blooming in August and maybe into September. And it is an excellent pollinator plant. Okay, so the next one is showy milkweed. So this is a better milkweed. So for those of you who live at elevation, the swamp milkweed may not work as well, but the showy milkweed could work for even people at higher elevations. In fact, this is going to be the only milkweed that would work at higher elevations. It's a little bit more of a coarse-looking plant, but again, it is fragrant. It is a wonderful host plant for monarch butterflies. And again, will attract all kinds of different bumblebees, butterflies, and other plants. And it's also actually, surprisingly, this is a good edible plant, even though it has that milky latex. It has some cyanogenic glycosides. If you boil them properly, I'm told it's actually a very tasty plant, plus the seed pods are edible. I haven't tried it myself, but some people say that works pretty well. Okay, the next plant is orange sneezeweed. So this this plant is kind of blooms from midsummer to maybe August. It can be quite tall, especially in amended soils with a lot of water. It's very good for butterflies. It's very good for bees. And it also just provides a nice tall, very intense color block in the garden. I really love that golden color. I think it lights up the garden. And it blooms at a time when maybe some of those other golds are not quite blooming, which is more that mid to the early late part of the summertime. All right, the next one is blue flag. So this is our native iris, despite the fact that it's Iris missouriensis. It has a pretty wide range. You typically find it in wetter areas at high elevations, but you could grow it at a lower elevation if you had amended soil and you gave it some water. At higher elevations, you can actually grow it even in drier soils with very little water. I have it growing in my garden just with all my other garden plants. So it has a very charming blue flower. It attracts bumblebees to it, and just, you know, it's one of our few native plants. It's also super resistant to deer because it has a very toxic foliage, and also has a very bitter taste. So when I've been transplanting in my garden, I accidentally get a little on my hands and get it into my mouth. It is unbelievably nasty tasting. So that really does help. I'm seeing Elbert County says, what do you consider higher elevation? So I'm saying like anything above 7,000 to 7,500 is what I'm considering higher elevations. So really 7,500 is a big cutoff range. And so anything below that, so I'm speaking from my office at 9,300 feet. So that gives you a perspective on what, I consider Golden to be low elevation. So, but yeah, so right around 7,500 is what is kind of the cutoff for a lot of the plants when I'm saying won't work at higher elevations. Okay, next one is bee balm. So this is a great garden plant. It attracts bumblebees, it attracts butterflies, and also attracts hummingbirds. You can use it as an oregano substitute, which is a really nice thing to have. So you can sort of have an ornamental that you can use in your cooking, and it will do just fine in amended situations. And then Rocky Mountain penstemon is one of the penstemons that's going to be most likely to work in amended soils. And so this is, so some of the penstemons really strictly require well-drained soils. So the Rocky Mountain penstemon has a higher tolerance for organic matter in the soil, and also has a higher tolerance for watering. So if you live in a urban landscape and you have to water more, this might be a good choice for you. All right, moving on to the dry semi-shade plants. So the Arnica is a plant that will grow in more dry shade, and it has nice yellow flowers in the springtime, and then it also can be used medicinally. It's hard, I think, to find by seed, so this would be one that would be a little bit on the more challenging side. Harebells, though, are a great plant. You can find them fairly readily in garden centers, and I think they make a fantastic garden plant. They have just such a charm to them. They look like little fairy bells. They're not very tall plants, and they're really great for small bee pollinators. And they self-seed a little bit in the garden, and it always looks nice. Wherever they land, they always sort of complement the plant that's next to them. So I highly recommend using this plant. And it's also a very tough and variable plant. So this could be a plant that could also take full sun. But if you want, if you're looking for something that can tolerate a bit of shade, this would be helpful. Our wild geraniums, the Geranium viscosissimum and Geranium cespitosum, are also good for semi-shade situations, all the way up to full sun. They have a long season of bloom of these like nice rosy pink flowers with the very bold nectar guides guiding the bees to the center where the nectar is. And then they also both turn a wonderful fall red. So this is a perennial that actually turns red in the fall, which is unusual. So this could be a plant that could have gone into the fall red category. And then prairie smoke works well in a semi-shade situation again. So this would be, so this is, has pink flowers that nod in the early fall. I'm sorry, in the early summer. And they're great for bumblebees. It's actually really fun to watch the bumblebees scramble to get upside down and into that small opening. Somehow they can manage it. Doesn't look the most appealing to me for a bumblebee, but I think that that's really good. And then when they go to seed in the later on in the season, they have the seed heads have a great light catching texture to them, and they really will add some movement and just some interest into the garden even after they've finished blooming. All right, the next one is rock spray. So this one maybe is not as common, but you would find this at sort of mid-range elevation. So you'd see it in the foothills. It will bloom even in the shade. It'll attract a lot of different pollinators to it. And then you see that it has this really exuberant spray of flowers. And then those kind of turn a nice rusty red, and that will last throughout the fall. So they kind of add a little extra interest. And then creeping mahonia is a wonderful plant for dry shade. It will bloom even under pine trees. And so this is, I know, a difficult situation for a lot of people, is that they want to have something growing under pine trees, and grass won't work. and a lot of other things won't work, but the creeping mahonia actually will. It's an evergreen plant, and it actually will turn a red, sort of a bronzy red, and stay that way all winter long. And it actually, if you plant it in the full sun, it will be fine in the full sun, but it'll tend to winter burn. So it'll have a more even red color and nicer color if you do plant it in the shade. In the springtime, it has beautiful yellow flowers that have such a wonderful honey scent to them. I love smelling them. It's worth bending all the way over to the ground to smell them. And then they also produce a blue fruit that is edible by, you could eat it yourself, but you could, you might want to just leave it for the wildlife because it's not super tasty. Okay, I see Latina is asking, so it's not as great under other than evergreens? No, it would be fine under other trees as well. I'm just saying that evergreens tend to be the toughest situation, and so that it can be hard under or those are the hardest, but you could certainly plant it under trees that are not evergreen. Okay, the next one is pasque flower. So this will bloom earlier in the spring if it's in full sun, but it will also bloom in part shade. It is wonderful for attracting early pollinators. So if any of you are raised bees or are concerned about bees, bumblebees or honeybees, any of them, this is one of the first plants that is available for pollinators. It also will go to seed and have a wonderful fuzzy seed head like some of the other plants I've been talking about later in the season. All right, in terms of shrubs, the boulder raspberry will bloom in semi-shade. So at lower elevations, it can tolerate quite a lot of shade and still bloom well. At higher elevations, I've found that it wants to have more full sun. It doesn't do as well in the shade. So you might want to just consider that. You can see that it's a very tough plant. So I took this picture on the left on the hill above my house, and you can just see it's growing straight out of a rock. So you can see how drought tolerant it is, and you can see that it is tolerant of full sun. But it also is one of those plants shrubs that is notable for being able to flower in the shade. It has big white blooms it's in the rose family. They're not fragrant, but they're very attractive to especially bumblebees. So they love to come around into all those different petals. Okay, I see a question. Please define semi-shade. So that would be the amount of sun that you'd be like a half-day sun. So it would be like maybe you'll get morning sun and afternoon shade, or afternoon sun and morning shade, or it could be a dappled shade. So that would be something that, like if you had a fairly light shade of a tree, it wouldn't be one of those thick, heavy canopied trees, but they could be fine if you didn't have just a really heavy shade. So then I see that does the boulder raspberry grow under pine trees? That maybe, unless you could put it out sort of towards the edge where it would get a little bit more sun, I'm not sure that it would grow well under pine trees. Plus, I think it might get a little too tall unless your pine tree is pretty much limbed up, because these can get a good 4 or 5 feet tall. All right, the next question is, which of these would be for full shade? So that the Mahonia repens, that creeping Mahonia is probably going to be your best plant for full shade. There's not a lot of plants that will grow in full shade. So so I know that may be disappointing, but there's not a huge palette of plants that work in that situation. But if you have full shade, I would try the creeping Mahonia. Okay, black-eyed Susan will also work in a dappled shade or morning sun or afternoon sun. It will also work in full sun. So this is a great plant for attracting. It's a great drought-tolerant plant, and it's also really good for attracting butterflies and bees. And then it produces a wonderful seed that finches love to come and eat during the fall. All right, so natives for moist shade. So some people have some moist shade situations. And so columbines actually will do well in that situation. So usually moist shade is a shade that has a little bit of extra organic matter in it, just because of the nature of moist shade. So the left is our Colorado columbine, and then we have the desert columbine, and then on the right we have the golden columbine. So all of those would be worth a try for. And again, these aren't full shade, but this will be good for Semi-shade situations. Another good situation for semi-shade may be that it's a very bright shade that would be near the north side of a house, as long as the house isn't a two-story house. Sometimes that shade, if there's no other trees around, that can be almost considered a semi-shade situation because of the angle of the sun and the fact that your house is not too tall. All right, lady fern. So David, this might be another good choice for a full shade. The lady fern, if you have moisture, the lady fern is a very tough plant. It can grow up to 9,000 feet, surprisingly, and it's also very critter resistant and adds a very tropical and exotic look to the garden, which is unusual for Colorado. Wild strawberries make a really good ground cover, so these could also be used in a full shade situation, although they would not flower very well, but you'd still get good ground cover. If they're in a semi-shade to full sun situation, they will have white flowers and then produce these very delectable little strawberries that are, they're extremely tasty, but the critters might beat you to them. And then in the fall, they will turn often a reddish color. So that's a beautiful thing to have later on. And then Richardson's geranium, this tends to grow more at higher elevations, but if you did give it sort of that moist shade, it would work even at lower elevation, and it has beautiful white flowers for a good season during the middle of the summer. Twinberry is a plant that you see more at higher elevations, in wetter elevations. It is a plant that has has twin yellow flowers in the early summer, and then it will get these berries, these sort of black berries with these red sepals on them. And the birds like the berries, and the hummingbirds really like the twinberry. So, or really like the flowers when they're blooming. So this would be something that if you did have, this again could probably take, especially at lower elevations, a more full shade. I don't know that I would go full shade, but if you give it some moisture. So at lower elevations, you would really need to give this quite a lot of extra moisture. And even at higher elevations, you'd want to be thinking about maybe planting it in an area where at least there'd be some extra groundwater or some extra runoff. Jacob's Ladder will do really well in moist shade. It has beautiful blue flowers that attract, again, a lot of different pollinators. And it also has kind of a skunky smell to the leaves. So this is somewhat critter resistant just because of that skunky smell. And Mountain Lover will also work in the part shade. You might even be able to try that in a full shade situation with some extra moisture. It's mostly grown for foliage. You can see on the right a pretty close up of the flowers, but if you look at them from a distance, you won't really see the flowers blooming much. So but this can be a good shade ground cover-ish plant. Okay, so moving on to natives for fragrance. So this would be great for people with dry, well-drained soils. And this would be only for people at lower elevations. This is not suitable for higher elevations. This is a plant that you find out on the eastern plains, and it blooms in the early summer with these great big snowballs, and they smell like vanilla. I mean, they really smell fantastic. They also attract a lot of different butterflies and will kind of have this nice sprawling look in the garden. So this would be a good choice, again, particularly if you have full sun and well-drained soils. Chocolate flower is also a wonderful fragrant plant. It really does smell like chocolate, although it's more on the Hershey's Kiss end of chocolate. It's more sort of on that milk chocolatey cocoa smell rather than, it's almost on that, I don't want to quite say like an artificial chocolate, but it's more along those lines than other things, but it does smell delicious. And also it does attract a variety of different pollinators, and you can use it for crafts later on in the season. So this is a great plant for lower elevations. It doesn't really work at higher elevations just because it requires a lot of heat. So this would be a full sun plant that would also work in a real hot, dry garden. It will take both clay and well-drained soils as long as it's not overwatered. It's a very drought-tolerant plant. Northern bedstraw is a plant that you'll find mostly originally at higher elevations, although it can grow down at lower elevations. And it also has this beautiful sort of vanilla-y, maybe honey-y smell. I really like how it smells. It attracts a lot of smaller pollinators to it, and it does grow somewhat rhizomatously. So again, it spreads by its roots underground, but it doesn't seem to be super vigorous, so it won't take over your entire yard. And it's really just has this delicate spray. It almost can act like a baby's breath in the garden as well. But I love the smell of it. An evening primrose also has a fantastic smell. It tends to bloom in the later afternoon into the evening hours, which is where it gets its name. And it has a big white flower, and the fragrance comes out at night. It's attractive to hawk moths, so hawk moths love that big white flower, and they love to come in and sip out the nectar of this plant. There's also another, so there's the one on the left, which is Enothera cespitosa, and this can be, so if this, some of the subspecies of the Enothera cespitosa, the evening primrose, can be pretty aggressive, and so they can take over large areas of the garden. And so if you are concerned about that, you could look for subspecies marginata, which you can find in some garden centers, and that is a lot less aggressive. Now, if you're trying to cover a wide area, this would be a fantastic plant to have just because it's very drought tolerant. It looks great at night. It's an early spring blooming plant, and it attracts a lot of different pollinators. Now, the Enothera the Enothera pallida, which is on the right, is a much more delicate plant, and it has smaller white flowers. Both of them will fade to pink when they're finished flowering. And this one also has a really nice fragrance. It's a little bit more lemony at night. And so this one looks, I think, would go better maybe like in a cottage garden look, whereas you could use the one on the left, the Enothera cespitosa, like as around if you had a moon garden area or a fire pit that you wanted to be hanging out at night just to have that nice fragrance. Palmer's penstemon is the only penstemon that is fragrant that I'm aware of. I don't think there are any other ones. And it's not a super fragrant plant, but it is fragrant, and I've heard it variously described. I've never caught it when it's in full bloom, and so I can't actually describe the fragrance to you, but a lot of people really talk about how great it is. It's a plant for hot, dry gardens. So it really wants it hot. It really wants it very dry. It needs full sun. So again, this could be in the section of your garden where it's hot, where you don't water much at all, and it will just do beautifully. It has a nice foliage to it, and then it's just big, tall, showy blooms of the flowers. An American plum is one of my favorites. I cannot wait until it blooms in the springtime. It will be blooming like in mid-April down at like the foothills elevations, and the fragrance of the plums is just, oh, it's wonderful. You have to go out hiking I always have to go out hiking every year just to smell the plums. It's just such a great smell, and it's attractive to a lot of different pollinators, and it also produces a very nice flavored plum. It's not really super tasty eating fresh, but it's really nice in preserves. And the wafer ash, or the hop tree, I was fortunate enough to smell it this last year. There's actually a specimen at the Chatfield Botanic Gardens the Denver Botanic Gardens at Chatfield. So if you want to go visit that, if you visit it in June and ask where the hop tree is or the wafer ash, they can tell you where it is. It has just this wonderful wafting fragrance. I was so thrilled when I smelled it, and I was like, wow, what is that plant? And so I finally got to smell this plant that I'd only ever heard about before. It also has nice little dangly ash-like seed pods, which is why it's called the wafer ash or the hop tree. They look a little bit like hops. And it turns a beautiful sort of clear yellow in the fall. So I think this one should be used a lot more widely in gardens. I wish it were more available. And the cliff rose, the Cowania stansburiana, also has a wonderful smell. It's a little bit more subtle, but it blooms like crazy, particularly on the western slopes in the springtime. And it has, just a nice, rich smell, plus it has these beautiful creamy flowers. The golden currant, Ribes odoratum. So the Ribes odoratum is the one of our currants that is actually fragrant. It has clove-like smell in the early spring, and the flowers are also attractive to hummingbirds. It has black berries that you can eat. or birds would be delighted to eat them. And then also it turns a beautiful red in the fall. And woods rose has a fantastic fragrance. So this is a tall, pretty vigorous rose. You would not want to be planting it someplace, again, where you don't have room to grow it. It can be pretty aggressive if it is given a lot of organic matter and water, but it has a great fragrance to it. It can turn a reddish color in the fall, and it always has beautiful hips, and those hips will last all winter long. They will feed the birds. But if you only have a small garden, or if you have really well-watered organic soils, this may not be your best choice. Okay, so native suitable for ground covers. I'm gonna have to pick up the pace here. I see I'm going too slowly. So kinnikinick, which is bearberry is another name. This would be another plant that could be, that can grow under pine trees in full shade. It has pink flowers in the spring, and then these nice berries that are good for different wildlife to eat. They're not poisonous, and it is an evergreen, so it will stay green all throughout the winter. Pussy toes are another good choice. So they have a beautiful turquoise blue flower and a nice tight foliage, and are great between flagstones. Oopsies, why is that? Okay, I think I missed that one. Just seems to be blank. I don't know why. Okay, poppy mallow. Don't know why it didn't come up right away, at least from my end. So the poppy mallow is has a long season of bloom, just brilliant magenta flowers, good for different pollinators. This is a lower elevation only plant, so this does not work at higher elevations. And also it's a very attractive to rabbit plant, and so if you do have a rabbit problem, probably not your best choice. The whiplash fleabane, so this one you'll be a little bit hard pressed to find, but this is Erigeron flagellaris. It has sort of a white to almost a pale blue flower, or sometimes a little bit pinky. It spreads by stolons like strawberries, and so you can see that on the right picture. It also is attractive to different pollinators, but if you let this go crazy on a hillside, it makes a really great cheerful ground cover. All right, sulfur flower. This is an early summer blooming plant. It's host to a lot of different butterflies, attractive to a lot of different butterflies, very drought tolerant. It is evergreen. The leaves will turn a beautiful red in the fall, and they will stay a bronze red all winter long, so it also provides winter interest. The next one is Matt penstemon. So this one is a short blooming penstemon that acts sort of like a ground cover, great blue flowers, and is very drought tolerant. Britain skullcap, you don't see very often. In fact, I've never seen it in a nursery center, but I think it should be more widely used. It has such spectacularly blue flowers, and it will grow in a part shade situation, attract a lot of different pollinators, and has a nice sort of minty fragrance to it. Jill says, I missed the plant that's good between flagstone. That's pussy toes. So, but I'm going to try to keep on going because I only have a few more minutes. So I'll try to catch your questions at the end. Okay, so native suitable for formal gardens. So the serviceberry is a great multi-season plant, and it has white flowers in the springtime, very decorative, could fit into any urban garden without a single person looking, raising their eyebrows at you. It has blue berries that are very tasty in the middle of the summer. They taste a little bit like blueberries. And then they also have a beautiful red fall foliage. Red twig dogwood. So at lower elevations, this would require some extra water, but this has fantastic red canes that look great in the wintertime, but they also have white flowers that are good for pollinators, white berries that are good for birds, and then red fall color. So it's a multi all year round interest. Aspen daisy, also known as showy daisy or showy fleabane, has beautiful purple flowers. It's very attractive to butterflies and other pollinators in the middle of the summer. And this could fit into any sort of garden situation. And Rocky Mountain juniper. This was something that, there are cultivars of this like skyrocket, that could be used in any sort of formal situation. So this picture was taken at Centennial Gardens in near Elitch's, and you can see it kind of pruned into a topiary shape. So there's no reason that you couldn't use that in, again, any garden in the snootiest homeowner association situation. Switchgrass will also provide a nice upright look or upright presence. And I've seen it used in very formal situations a lot of times, so it's becoming used more and more. And blue spruce is used in all kinds of formal gardens. You see it well used around different houses. If you don't have the space for the full 50-foot tall and broad plant, there's a cultivar called dwarf globe that you could put in even a small garden. And then shrubby cinquefoil is something that's used very commonly in median strips or even in like McDonald's landscaping, because it has it can be sheared into a nice tidy hedge or just a very round form. It has a lot of flowers for a lot of the season, and so it's just a widely used plant. And then yuccas, I never thought about them as being formal because they're always out in that sort of rangy area. But if you planted yuccas in the right kind of situation, you could make a very formal and striking look by just planting them a little bit more symmetrically. Okay, moving on to natives for fall color. So this one is not used very often, but I really like it. It's got a great spring bloom of flowers with this nice soft yellow. Attracts a lot of different bumblebees, but then in the fall it turns this beautiful soft reds, and so I think that this is a totally underused plant. You'll probably never be able to find it in a garden center, but I would recommend trying to get it if you can. And then the Virginia creeper, our native Virginia creeper, is the Parthenocissus vittacea, and it's a creeping vine, and this is again, this is going to only work at lower elevations. But it has blue berries that are great for birds. It also has a great red fall color, and it will creep up the side of buildings, up trees, and up fences, so they'll provide a really excellent fall backdrop. All right, 9-bark. So this is, again, an underused plant. It will work in shade situations. It has white flowers and that are attractive to pollinators, and then a beautiful red color. Chokecherry, has great sprays of white flowers that are fragrant in the springtime, produces glossy black berries that birds like. Bears also do like them, and they can be used for jams and jellies, and then it turns a beautiful red fall color. And then Gamble's oak, so this is native to the southern half of the state. It seems like the Monument Divide is about the cutoff for it, but you can grow it further north in the state. It's also called scrub oak. It has good wildlife value with the acorns that it produces, and then on years where the conditions are favorable, it turns a brilliant fall red. There's other years where it just goes straight to brown. I'm not quite sure what those situations are, but on a good red year, oh man, that's just a gorgeous look. All right, and then there's smooth sumac and 3-lobed sumac. So these are both turn really nice reds. The smooth sumac, which is on the left, is a rhizomatous grower, and it turns the best red. So this is only a plant that you'd want to plant in a very in an area where you had a big amount of space. So you wouldn't want to grow it, where you in a tight little area. So this would be if you have a sort of the back 40, as people refer to it. And you want to kind of have a barrier for, or just have space for it to grow. But it turns one of the best reds in the fall you can ever have. This 3-lobed sumac on the right is only a clump former, so it does not grow by rhizomes. And it will turn anywhere from this nice orange to a quite beautiful red. Plus it has some red berries that are good for birds. And then mountain ash. So this is going to be a better plant choice for people at higher elevations, but it's a wonderful plant. I love it. It's underused, has white flowers in the spring. It has red berries that are great for birds later on in the season. And then this is the one growing right out in front of my house, the picture in the middle. And wow, just look at the shades of reds and oranges and sort of purples on that plant. I think it is spectacular. Okay. All right, so that was my last one. So now I'm going to come back and catch a few questions that I missed. So, okay, so I think, let's see. Okay, so will there be time to tell us where you can buy natives? So this is a question from Brenda. So Brenda, the place to find where you can buy natives is to go to the Colorado Native Plant Society. And that, if you go into the resources page, there's actually a list of native plant vendors, both wholesale and retail. And so that's a good choice for where to buy them. And then you're also wondering what natives might be good for use as a property border. So, I mean, again, like you could use a lot of them. It kind of depends on what situations you're looking for. If you're, trying to, have things, if you have a lot of room, I think I would need to know more of your specifics, like how much property you have, because you could use something like the woods rose, which would be a very thorny and impenetrable one. You could use something like the serviceberry, which would be less formal, or you could even use like the shrubby cinquefoil. So I'm not sure what all plants would, what your situation is. So maybe you can mention that. Okay, so so then Carol asks, do you have a ton of daturas? They're not native. Yeah, they're native to further south, but they're hardy. Do they poison any nearby plants? No, they're not. They're not going to be allelopathic, which is what you're looking for other plants, but they are toxic to people and to potentially livestock or kids. So you do want to be cautious with datura, but they can be a nice plant in the garden. Okay, we got the answer for the lot cutoff for low versus high, which is 7,500 feet. Thank you, Barbara. And then, okay, so David is asking, you have problems with yucca. Can you tell me what problems that you're having? I'm not sure what problems that is. Okay, so yeah, so Sharon is saying that the official names are out of order, and so somebody mentioned that to me. Lisa Vernon resent out the ones I did realize that somehow the spacing got misformatted. So she sent out a new one. So if you haven't looked at your email recently, she did send out a new list of these plants that does have everything is lined up correctly. So check your box. Okay, so Keith Baldwin asked for a deer-resistant ground cover. Both the kinnikinnick and the Mahonia repens and even the pussy toes would work in deer situations. Now be aware that nothing is completely deer resistant. If the deer is hungry enough and that's all they've got, they'll go for any plant, but those would at least be more resistant. Okay, Yvonne says we get lots of sphinx moth larvae on our Virginia creeper mines. Well, that's cool. So then you get, and then they'll come and visit some of your other native plants. So the sphinx moth is also the hummingbird moth, or often, so that's pretty cool. And the flickers love the sumac berries. Yes, so see, you're planting a nice wildlife habitat. That's fantastic. Okay, so so David says your yuccas die. So again, like I don't know what your elevation is. I don't know what your watering situation is. Maybe why don't David? Why don't you talk to me? Maybe here, I'm just going to give you my phone number, and why don't you give me a call afterwards, because this is going to take too much time. So let me just give you my phone number to call, because I have to ask you a lot of questions. Okay. Okay, so then, oh, thanks, Barbara, for putting the link to the native plant vendors. That's wonderful. Okay, all right, we got another question coming in. And so I don't, oh, I don't see it. I guess they're not typing.